Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. I have one that I didn't really, I've been preparing for decades, but I didn't prepare for. It's sort of a case where I do a bunch of podcasts. I think I'm 92 in episodes, and my thinking and my perspective congeals, and then it comes to some point where I think, oh, I could actually make a concrete statement. And my feeling is that this one is too ambitious because there's decades of thinking that goes into it, and I don't know whether it's possible to elucidate all of it or to even outline all of it so that you go, okay, maybe what he's saying sounds kind of crazy, but I could see how he could get there. And I'm still not sure how I'm going to do it, whether I'm going to start way back at the beginning. But the subject of this, or what the topic is that, for those of you who don't know, I was raised in extremely rigid, not cult, but cult-like intensity of beliefs, generated more by my father, but by my mother, just because she was emotionally rigid, even though I don't think she believed the way my dad did. And I, as someone who deeply internalized belief systems and was intellectual and internalized things that adults were saying much more than my siblings did, was believed profoundly. And then when my parents left the church, I believed in a looser way, more just sort of a loyal feeling and a good feeling of this is the right thing to believe and this makes you a good person. And then slowly over time, I had more and more issues with organized religion. I saw a lot of damage. I saw the rigidity. I saw how much organized religion, no matter how much it tried to be inclusive and kind and to show love and acceptance and to be a guiding light to humankind, that it unfailingly ended up othering people, rejecting people, insulting people, labeling people as sinners and lost, and congregations would begin to work their way into this feeling of superiority. And also, as someone who read the Bible a couple of times, there are things in the Bible that are just vile. And you can go ahead and slavishly believe, but for all your purported morality, there are things that the Bible says that are just sick and horrors. Slaughter of children, stoning women to death for infidelity. One of my favorite examples is, and this is how you can always tell that people don't, I'm beating up on Christianity, but this applies to Judaism, Islam, whatever. But for example, the story of Lot as it is taught is supposedly about how Sodom and Gomorrah, where the word sodomy came from, were these places where the people had turned from God and turned from decency and had become such horribly sinful places that God sought out the only righteous, holy man, the only man who continued to have a connection to God, which was Lot. So supposedly the message is that it's a story about this man who's the only holy man who actually God communicates, I'm going to destroy these cities, I need you to leave. And Lot bargains and pleads out of the goodness and generosity of his heart, please, I know there are good people, let me find these people. If I can even find 100, will you spare these cities? If I can even find 20, will you spare these cities? If I can even find 10, will you spare these cities? and he can't do so. And ultimately, with his family and his wife, he flees these cities, and God rains fire and brimstone down upon these cities and destroys them, wipes them from the face of the map. And Lot's wife, Lot has been instructed, do not turn and look back. Lot's wife, out of grief over the loss of her friends, turns and looks back and is turned into a pillar of salt. So there's this lesson of obeying God and obeying God's directives, and that there are consequences to not doing so. There's this lesson of this man who's righteous and holy, right? Which is what they always tease out. There's the obvious message about the evils of homosexuality, which is why the city of Sodom becomes the root for the word sodomy, this supposedly sinful thing. And I actually read the Bible, and if you read it, what no one talks about is one of the tests that God sends is he sends two angels as these weary, dusty travelers, these men coming into the city. And back then, hospitality and how you treated strangers in want of water or safety was a big measure of whether or not you were a good person. And so this is this test, and these men are sent into the city, and they're pursued by a mob of people who want to rape and abuse them and use them. And Lot takes them in, right, to harbor them and protect them from the evils of these people. And this, of course, bears up, underpins the narrative that Lot's this good person seeking goodness and seeking to do goodness amidst these sinful, evil people who are seeking to violate these travelers. And they gather in a mob outside Lot's house, and they say, Lot, what are you doing? Why are you protecting these men? Send these men out so we can have our way with them. And Lot says, please do not do this evil. And everyone skips over what he says. Lot says, I have 2 virgin daughters. I will send them out to you instead. Everybody skips over that. Lot offers his own daughters up for rape. And supposedly this is a good and righteous act. Supposedly this is a righteous man, the man who was chosen by God to decide to attempt to find goodness and save the city. And he's okay with his daughters being raped in place of these travelers. Well, okay, I understand, the Old Testament is the Torah and whatever, and we're talking about these old tribal people, the Jewish people, for whom in those rough times, et cetera, women were basically chattel to sort of cook food and to bear children. They were sort of the property of the tribe. I understand why things that are incredibly deeply offensive to us and morally horrifying have evolved into human society. I can imagine that at some point there might be a tribe who, if a child is born weak or ill, might kill the baby, right? Because they have such hard lives that they can't deal with anyone with disability. Like, there's all of these morally horrific things that humans evolve into. So I'm not shocked, like, oh my God, how could this happen? But given the childish, rigid morality and claims of people who believe in Christianity or Judaism, right, the moral law of Judaism or the moral law of Islam or anything, like almost any religious belief system, the reason people like me just end up abandoning ship is because these people do not even attempt to pay attention to what's actually in their holy books. That just say these morally reprehensible, sick, evil things, and you're just supposed to, and there will be some pastors who will attempt to explain it and talk around it. But I just got to the point where I'm like, you know what? Go fuck yourself. Offering your daughters up for rape is fucking sick. Go fuck yourself. I know what's right and I know what's wrong. And yes, sending those men out to be raped is wrong, but sending your daughters out to be raped is wrong. There's no difference. There's no difference in the moral sickness of it. I don't care what the times were and how society was structured, which is often how those religious folks attempt to explain, which just explains nothing, because now all you're doing is saying it's okay if the culture like the times and the culture justify, oh, your transcendent divine rights and wrongs evolve with human culture. What the fuck are you saying? What you're saying is human culture invented God. Like, whatever. Shut up. It's just stupid, right? So anyway, I evolved through those things and just recognizing that it's like the Old Testament says some horrific things that I'm like, I don't care. I'm not interested in discussing this. You can tell me I'm going to hell. You can argue. You can talk around it, but you can go fuck yourself. If that's part of it and you're trying to justify that, I'm out. I don't give a shit. You don't need to believe what I believe. You can think anything you want to think about me. But at some point, I'm just like, go fuck yourself. If you just can't be a human and go, oh no, that's wrong. No, I don't care I don't care if it's in the Bible. I don't care if some apparent angel came down on wings and handed this to you and said, you have to subscribe to this. This is a good act. You can go fuck yourself, because I know what's right and what's wrong. And offering your virgin daughters for rape is fucking wrong. Okay. It's not discussable with me. Get bent. Okay. So I went through that process and I came to a point where, and I even converted to Islam. I played around with Islam. I played around with Judaism. I was seeking a religious spiritual home. I was seeking a relationship to God. And I abandoned, and I intellectually understood that these are, the issues I have with these things are all human, not divine. But I slowly became agnostic, and I dived deeper and deeper into science and logic and reason, and slowly became an atheist. And was never like an angry, rageful atheist, just like I don't, like every time I hear a religious person talk or a believer talk, their debates and arguments are so self-referential and so circular and so childish and silly. And if they're honest and you gently and respectfully push them to it, ultimately they'll just say, look, it comes down to faith. I feel within myself that this is right. And I'm like, I don't have an argument with that. I respect that. Like, we're all navigating this reality with limited information, limited understanding, and limited wisdom. And 99% of the people who purport to be wiser than us, who are holy people leading us, end up being fucking pedophiles or liars, or it's some guru who creates some commune, but the truth is he's convinced everyone that he should sleep with all the young women. Like, they're all full of shit, right? So I'm not mad at you that you have some inner feeling and sense, right? I'm trusting my own inner moral sense to be like, this guy Lot's a fucking asshole. The guy offered his virgin daughters for rape. And by the way, the same guy later, his daughters got him drunk and both of them slept with him on subsequent nights to try to continue his line. Again, like, whatever, I understand the cultural context, but if you're trying to tell me that this is a divinely inspired human, you can go fuck yourself, because I don't subscribe to the rape of anyone. And I also think it's pretty sick if drunk or not drunk. Like, I don't care how drunk you get me. There's no danger of me ever sleeping with my children. So shut the fuck up. Like, I don't need a conversation around that. Right? So there was this whole process. But I had many experiences that sort of led me on this path where, obviously, if you listen to my podcast, you know that I'm spiritually oriented, or I believe something, or I have a feeling about something, that there are truths that seem to have been present to me that once I started paying attention and going, this is Like, I can argue it, I can say it's not logical or reasonable, but it just seems so blindingly obvious to me that there are ways that I was helped and information was offered to me, and I was evolved in ways that allowed me to come to this place where I do absolutely believe there's something more than just mechanistic cause and effect science. But starting, for example, in middle school, I was thinking about time, and I had this realization that the only way anyone argues about time, I had the thought that it's like time doesn't exist. The only way anyone ever argues that time moves faster or slower is that they're using a process, a mechanistic process, that they have an expectation for how fast or slow it is supposed to be. And when that mechanistic process moves faster, they say time has moved faster. And when it moves slower, they say time has moved slower. And in context of Einstein's relativity, I really looked at this and I was like, I don't think time actually exists. I think it's actually a component of perception. Okay, so I had that thought in middle school that started putting me on the path to the perception that consciousness and conscious perception is kind of the shape of everything that we think of as concrete Newtonian physics. And there are other people, much, much smarter people than me, who have said this before. Immanuel Kant, I think, posited this, that time and space are not objective realities, but are in fact the shape of our perception. And now quantum physics is bearing out this perspective. And the Hindus, 3,000, 5,000 years ago, 10,000, I don't even know how long, put this forward. So this is not, I didn't suddenly invent some new thought, right? Okay, so this was the beginning. Then in college, I really got into philosophy, but hard logic, not the woo-woo way out there, but really, how do we know what we know? Epistemology. And so I would do thought experiments. And being really into language, I thought about, meaning. And I did this thought experiment where it's like, if these rocks by gravitational process are disturbed by an earthquake and they roll down the side of a mountain, and just by random chance, they happen to spell out what seems to look like to be or not to be, T-O, blah, blah, blah. Does that mean anything? And then as you play through it, you go, well, a human walking by could certainly look at that and go, oh my God, like it's Shakespeare. Something is meant here. There's a meaning. But that's the human consciousness and awareness imbuing meaning. So the meaning is coming from that person. The meaning was not intended, and it actually didn't have any meaning. It's sort of like if something that looks like the face of Mother Mary shows up in your toast, people freak out and they go, oh my God. And it's like, well, it's possible that that was random and that toast has no meaning, but you, the observer, are imbuing it with meaning. Okay, so clearly meaning is aligning with the consciousness, the conscious being. And it's like the mountain is just a physics process. So just physics, mechanistic cause and effect is absent meaning unless there's a conscious being within it, choosing, thinking, noticing, choosing different ways that those laws can play out. And I played through that much more complexity from different scenarios. What if the mountain actually is conscious and it accesses the laws of physics to intentionally spell out to be or not to be, and it's making an existential statement, but there's only a rock with no consciousness to observe it? Does meaning exist? Yes, it exists in the intention of the conscious mountain. If both a conscious observer and a conscious mountain is there, then certainly it's obvious logically that there's meaning. There's meaning intended, there's meaning received. If both sides are arbitrary, it's just an earthquake and the rocks just happen to fall that way and there's only a rock there to observe it and the rock has no consciousness, clearly there's no meaning. So simply put, again, you can explore that more deeply with a lot more logic and reason, but simply put, meaning inheres in conscious awareness. It does not inhere in physical cause and effect laws. That's predictable. And the reason it's predictable is because there's no conscious being choosing it can go this way or it can go that way, right? Okay, so you think through that. So I'm really into logic and reason then, but I'm beginning to see that even logic and reason tells you that meaning inheres in conscious awareness, not in physics. Right? And so you can play this out with moral experiments too. What makes something immoral or evil? If a child, by some weird physics circumstance, happens to just be born at the foot of a volcano, and that volcano just happens to arbitrarily erupt and the child is burnt to death, that is a horrific, horrible, and sad, but is it immoral? Is it sinful? Is it evil? No, the mountain had no intention and the child didn't place it. So right? So there's a moral being in the child, but the child is innocent of the outcome. So this is a horror that it happens, but there's nothing immoral, right? But what if the mountain is conscious and it's this evil being who's like, oh, I'm going to burn this child alive? Well, that's certainly immoral and evil, that this conscious child suffers and this conscious being chooses to cause a suffering. Okay, that's easy. What if the child actually isn't conscious? It's really just a rock that appears like a child, but the mountain is conscious and intends to cause horror and suffering, but there is no horror and suffering. Certainly, logically, you can see that that's still evil and immoral, though there is no suffering that results. Right? So if suffering results with no evil intent, there's no moral quality to it. If suffering does not occur, but suffering is intended by a conscious intender, that certainly shows that there's immorality in it. So you can play that through. There's 4 possibilities. There's no awareness on either end. There's awareness on the experiencer, but not on the intender. That there's no immorality. There's no experience on either. There's no immorality. There is experience on the intender, but no experience on the experiencer. That's immoral. There's awareness on the experiencer and there's awareness and attention on the intender. That's immoral. So you go through these quadrants and you realize, oh, immorality involves choice, the ability to choose and to intend an outcome. And to call something immoral or evil requires an intender, right? Which is someone who is conscious and can choose. So then I had the realization, oh, consciousness, choice, and moral quality inhere in consciousness. Without consciousness, there's no moral quality to experiences. They might be horrifically painful or not, but they're not meaningful in the sense of. So meaning, moral quality, and choice inhere in consciousness, right? So I'm using logic to play through these things. I don't have time to go through everything. I've had so many experiences that have led me to a spiritual belief or realization, but I won't belabor the point and I won't abuse your time because we're talking about decades and decades and decades of experience, and also I'm hyper compulsive about analyzing and thinking through and boiling things down to their simplest construction or model achievable by logic or reason. Let's come to another experience. So I came into psychology with a deep belief in the science and understanding of our nervous systems, and that so much shame that people experience around PTSD, anxiety, ADHD, ADD, depression, et cetera, they blame themselves, et cetera, is simply a cause and effect organic process wherein the central nervous system behaves in certain ways given certain biological propensities and certain intense experiences that happen often enough that the central nervous system with real consistency will respond in exactly the same way. And if that's so, there's no moral quality to the fact that you get depressed or you have PTSD, or well, it's not your fault. Fault's not involved. It's just this mechanistic thing. And I had learned how to rewire my own brain and central nervous system. I had eliminated severe clinical depression. I eliminated PTSD as a daily experience and interruption of my life. And it was like, oh my God, this is this incredibly hopeful and beautiful thing, and I can help people. But it was deeply grounded in science. But over the course of sitting with people who struggled with mental health issues, I noticed a couple correlations and a couple of outcomes that seemed to have spiritual connotations. Doesn't prove anything, but it's very suggestive. And the first was that I could see that there is a direct correlation, maybe causation, between the severity of people's mental health issues and how profoundly erroneous those people's beliefs about and perceptions of themselves were incredibly negative. And I don't mean negative as in, oh, I've been an alcoholic for 10 years, I ruined my marriage, I've really behaved badly. But I mean almost like paranoid, horrible, unreasonable, cartoonish beliefs about themselves, about how horrible they are, how stupid they are, how shameful and awful they are, how unacceptable and horrible their presence is amongst other beings. The more they believed, literally explicitly believed things like that, or unconsciously believed things like that, the severity of their mental health symptoms exactly matched that intensity. So, okay, maybe the problem is simply that people believe horrible things about themselves. And therapists definitely spend a lot of time reframing and honoring people's presence and being kind and teasing out things that they don't notice about themselves. They're like, hey, you're really hard on yourself, but I notice how kind you are to your children, and this real skill that you have as a parent, and that's really exceptional and it's beautiful, and you never talk about that, and you don't really honor yourself for that. Right? So therapists, we're not trying to stroke your ego, but we're seeing like real beauty about you and trying to tease it out and going, look, I'm not denying that you've screwed up or there might be reasons to hate yourself, but there's something wrong with the fact that you seem obsessed with the reason to hate yourself and you completely deny and ignore reasons to like yourself. So I noticed that correlation, possible causation of the severity of mental health issues is not this clinical thing like, oh, you have this disorder. It's based on identity beliefs, but not accurate identity beliefs, like horrible distortions of who people are. And then you see also that narcissists who have horrible distortions in the opposite direction of how charming they are and how smart they are and how much better than they are than people, every single one of those people has built that as an exact balance or an attempt to escape how horrible they actually feel about themselves. So it's the same equation. So the only people who are actually comfortable are people who have a reasonable, neutral perception of self. They understand that there are some things about themselves that don't work, and there are some things that are really nice and really beautiful. But at core, they don't actually believe that their value is defined by either how good they are or how bad they are at anything. And so, to simplify, the better I got at using attachment focus EMDR and EMDR at healing, helping people heal themselves, was to over and over and over have this startling experience that once people were healed and their symptoms were gone and they felt all this rejuvenation of life and energy and joy and a desire to connect to other people and love their kids or their spouse or to move on if their spouse is not the right person, like whatever it is, they didn't have an exalted opinion of themselves and they didn't have a negative opinion. They no longer had an opinion of themselves that was dependent on any of that, any of those transactional things in which society goes, you're good because or you're bad because. They seem to have this freedom from the need for definitions of self, in which they came to know themselves as this mysterious, curious, conscious presence that has the potential to do so much and to love and to discover and to create. And they were just filled with the joy and the desire to go out and just experience life and to be in it without having to define themselves or make some meaning about themselves. They started enjoying the meaning of the mysterious meaning of what it is to just be a conscious being. So I began to see that the less people let go of definitions, which are very mechanistic and meaningless, of attempting to transactionally make themselves good, make themselves have a good self-esteem, or trying to escape some mechanistic transactional meaning for why they're bad. Once they stop doing either thing and abandon the whole bloody mess of trying to define themselves, they simply found that they were a conscious being and that in and of itself was mysteriously beautiful and meaningful without having to be defined or proven. Okay. And I started asking myself, people are not paying attention. I'm not paying attention if I don't realize what a curious thing it is that when people truly and profoundly heal, they don't heal because they've decided they're a good person, and they don't heal because they've escaped a definition of themselves as a bad person. They mysteriously heal because they no longer engage either of those systems, which are provable and definable and can be discussed and but are mechanistic and transactional. That their healing comes from this neutral, ineffable, mysterious acceptance that they are conscious and they are here and there's nothing else to be done or said about it. And any definition that makes them feel bad about themselves or feel good about themselves, both are an empty, transactional, meaningless cause and effect process that has no more meaning than the rocks falling down the side of the mountain it might have accidentally fallen into to be or not to be, but it actually has no meaning unless there's an intending conscious being intending the meaning and creating it, and a being receiving it who's conscious. So then I began to go, this is weird and mysterious. How is it that true, scientifically grounded, measurable healing, elimination of cortisol levels, inflammation, PTSD, a twitchiness, ADD, an inability to focus, all of these things, how is it that the freedom from that, the elimination from that, always comes with some elevation of conscious awareness of the ineffable, mysterious fact that you're a conscious being and that there's nothing in this mishigas of cause and effect bullshit and definitions and meanings and transactional meanings where society wants you to think about yourself this way because then they can use it to leverage and to guilt you into things that it needs. Like, how come it is that true psychological healing always tracks exactly with this escape, this freedom to just be a conscious, just be the mysterious fact of a conscious being with no need to define self or even to know self other than to have a deep experience that I exist. And then you begin noticing that when people enter that state, it comes with joy, profound forgiveness, deep curiosity, energy, a profound curiosity of what can be created, stopping the focus on all the things that are wrong and how everything's so limited and people like that, and to just go, oh my God, even given what it is, there's so many possibilities, there's so many things that could be done. I just want to live and be and love. And it always comes with this profound love for self and all other life. Why? I'm not trying to prove something. I was rigidly scientific about this process of healing and what can happen with the rewiring of the central nervous system, blah, blah, blah. But every time I succeeded, it led me past the scaffolding of science and reason to this mysterious truth that consciousness exists. And every time it shows up unfettered from the transactional bullshit of transactional society trying to elicit getting its needs met by defining you so that you can be controlled. Once you're free of that, suddenly this mysterious thing shows up, this free consciousness in which choice inheres, meaning inheres, right? That was the moral conversation, because morality is about something meaning something. Freedom inheres, awareness inheres, creativity inheres, a sense of oneness or connection to all living conscious being inheres, profound love for self and others inhere. Like, it just shows up. I can't prove anything to you, but it shows up every goddamn time. This is just one data point, this conclusion. It took me all of that to lead to that conclusion. But this is just one data point. I could give you so many other examples, experiences I had through our home burning in the Palisades fire. Experiences I had where in a period of about 5 years, like 7 very, very important people to me suddenly died. And I experienced pain and loss and grief, but things that I learned in that set me on my on this path to see beyond logic, reason, to experience beyond. And I'm not a spiritual leader. I don't know anything. I'm only telling you that it becomes irrefutable that something is here and these things inhere in it. And logic tells you that it requires consciousness for me to even see it. You can't be aware of something without being conscious. So there was this long process. Now, the thing that inspired this was, and I'll finish with this, was that yesterday I did a long, about a 50-minute podcast excavating, explaining what a trauma bond is. And I'll review very quickly simply that trauma bonds in romantic relationships are so incredibly elegant, exacting, and perfectly fit, where one person's trauma response to their abusive parents looks exactly like their partner's abusive parents, which creates their trauma response, and their trauma response looks exactly like this partner's abusive parents. So that they're trapped in the situation where they truly love someone and they're bonded with someone, and yet this person frequently shows up exactly like their abusive parents. And they're left in this trap. They want their relationship to work. They're profoundly motivated. They know they love this other person, and yet they experience the most hateful, hated things that they swore that they would never, ever put up with again. And here they are again. And as long as they believe, as I explained, each person, their trauma response, crafted over decades of responding to their abusive parent, feels so profoundly just and righteous and reasonable, and a reasonable, justified response to their partner, it feels so right that unless they increase and expand their awareness of how mechanistic it is, they will never escape that trauma bond. Because it looks perfectly justified given their childhood, but it is not justified if they truly knew what their spouse grew up in and why they have this exact response that they feel is totally justified, right? Go back and listen to that episode 92 to really get the full complexity and elegance of how incredibly exacting, how the things that their partner says has exact coloration and tone of their abusive parent. So I've watched that thing and gone, why is it that though we aggrandize, mythologize, and idealize romantic relationships, for most people it is the most difficult, painful thing that they will ever do in their life, other than maybe difficult relationships with kids. Society lies, like all of the romantic movies is a fucking lie. Romantic relationships are the most challenging, most difficult, often the most painful thing anyone will ever do across decades and decades and decades of their lives if they make it. If they don't and they leave, 99% of the time, those people find some way to choose someone who has exactly the same emotional signature. First, they marry an overt narcissist, and then they marry a covert narcissist, because the covert narcissist is actually squishy and loving, but they still make everything about them at the end of the day, about how hurt they are and blah, blah, blah. They're always the victim, where the overt narcissist is, go away. The overt narcissist just thinks they're better than everybody. There's some ancient Vedic text that calls marriage a divine battle. And I've never forgotten that, because that seems so accurate. Like, why would this be? Why would it be that millions of people across the globe are trapped in relationships in which elegantly and perfectly, and this is where I don't think it's just like psychologists are just like, well, you don't do what's good for you, you do what's familiar to you. Yeah, maybe, except it is so perfectly, elegantly, almost like intentionally designed to just be exact, so that you have to relive and you're trapped in re-experiencing over and over and over your childhood. Why? And so now, as a more spiritually oriented person who believes that there is something more than mechanistic processes, I can tell you why I suspect. I suspect because the purpose of being here on earth is not to get married and have kids. It's not about having sex. It's not about eating good food. It's not about building a business. It's not about making a bunch of money. It's not about correcting the wrongs of society. It's not about any of the shit that society tells you you're supposed to do. But in the end, if you follow those things, it's good for society and most of the time isn't good for you. It's not any of those things. It doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. It doesn't matter if you're a hermit in the outback and never speak to anybody. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter. None of that matters. You're here to wake up and to remember and expand your awareness of yourself as a conscious being. And there is no more elegant tool than to be placed in a deeply bonded relationship, often with kids, in which you feel that it's impossible to escape. And even if you did escape, you would choose someone else who's exactly the same fucking way, to be presented with the same misery that you did everything you could to escape, but you did it by mechanistic, unaware, compulsive responses, trauma responses, which is about evolution. It's not about a conscious awareness. And that the only freedom and escape that you can ever achieve from this thing is to actually expand as a conscious awareness, to stop hating and resenting your partner or yourself, to stop suffering it, and to actually look and see how mechanistic and meaningless those compulsive trauma responses are that were coded in by your childhood, and to wake up and go, oh my God, I don't need to do this. I can stay in the relationship. I can leave the relationship, whatever it is. But this compulsive, wounded response to their compulsive, wounded response is meaningless. It has no meaning. And it is me as a conscious being limiting my awareness of how conscious I am and how possibly infinite my consciousness is. That's what I think the purpose of a trauma bond is. I don't think you're trapped in it because you choose familiar things. I think it's either handed to you or you choose it before you incarnate, because it is a perfect trap from which there is no way to escape unless you expand your consciousness and recognize the meaningless, mechanistic, fight or flight evolutionary response and how meaningless it is to sit there and suffer and be a victim of something, when you could just expand awareness and see the thing and go, I can invent ways of not participating in this. I can invent ways because I am conscious and aware, and I have an infinite number of ways that I can invent a new way of being, a new way of feeling, a new way of responding, a new way of receiving, such that it makes that meaningless process null and void. To simplify, you could say, let's say by random chance, the volcano has an earthquake and these rocks roll down, and instead of to be or to not to be, it falls into the apparent pattern of an F-U-C-K-Y-O-U. It says, fuck you. Okay? And there's some hiker who walks by and every time feels offended and angered, like, why would someone do this? Why are you saying, fuck me? Fuck you, man. And gets angry and twisted up and is now a victim of this meaning. But in fact, there was no meaning. It's just a random evolutionary process of gravity and momentum, and it's arbitrary that it accidentally spelled out something that appears fuck you. But that person who's supposedly suffering that literally is creating the meaning of fuck me out of something that doesn't have that meaning, even though it elegantly appears to. Right? Now you could say, yeah, but my partner is in a mountain. No, they're not. But their compulsive trauma response to their childhood is without meaning, is unconscious and meaningless. It doesn't mean anything about you. You can be like, oh, it makes me so mad, like, oh, my mom. Okay, that's your compulsive childhood trauma response. And yours isn't meaningful either. And when your partner gets hurt by your compulsive, meaningless childhood response, they're also delusional. They're also creating the meaning of it. The error is that you believe that your trauma response has any meaning. It's not meaningful. It's just an evolutionarily built-in response that helped the human race propagate itself. It increased the chances that you would not get eaten by a lion and you would have kids. That's all. It's not meaningful. Evolution doesn't give a fuck whether you suffer or whether something means something about you or not. Evolution just makes sure that the species propagates. It's not meaningful, right? So if you quibble with my example of the mountain, I'm not implying that you or your partner are a mountain without meaning. I'm implying that you're abusing your own conscious awareness by using it to pretend that your trauma response is meaningful. I'm not saying the fact that you're traumatized isn't meaningful. It is, because you suffer. But the actual process of triggering off of your partner's unconscious behavior is your unconscious behavior. It's not conscious. So that part is just a mountain with no conscious intention. It's just a biological process. Trauma bonds and healing from trauma bonds and either choosing to stay in the relationship or not is irrelevant. It's meaningless. There isn't a right answer. The purpose of it, in my opinion, is to hand you a situation that's so elegantly, devilishly perfectly configured to exactly recreate your childhood experiences so that you can have an unconscious process, that the only escape possible is by the expansion and elevation of your awareness that that is not meaningful and to no longer participate in it. That isn't to be angrily reject it. That, again, is evolutionary process. It doesn't mean to rage at or punish your partner by going, I'm not putting up with this shit, you're full of shit, and leaving them and being fine. Like, I hope they learn. Okay, no, that's all anger and trauma. That's all meaninglessness. That's all evolutionary response. With you putting human intelligence on it to make it look like it's meaningful. It's not meaningful. It's just you having an evolutionary response. The invitation is to truly expand awareness and go, oh, though painful, my process and my partner's process is meaningless. It has no inherent meaning. The invitation is for me to awake and expand my conscious awareness of what's meaningful and what is empty of meaning. And to see that when I take my conscious awareness and bury it in things that are empty of meaning, I suffer. And when I wake up and free myself from those things, my suffering ceases. For me, this is all very logical and reasonable, and in fact, science, logic, and reason leads you to what appears to me to be irrefutable, that I experience over and over and over, that the only thing that's real and meaningful is consciousness. Joy, love, connection, curiosity, non-judgment is all inherent to conscious awareness. And that conscious awareness's task within this milieu, whatever the fuck this Michigas is to recognize how perfectly, elegantly suited these traps are, such that there is no escape without expansion of and honoring of and re-inhabiting your true status, which is a conscious awareness which is free, morally beautiful, curious, and joyful. There is no other purpose and point to any experience on the face of this planet or in this reality. That's what seems to be irrefutably true, that shows up as true over and over. And my proof of it isn't absolute or exact proof, because that puts you into cause and effect physics, which is meaningless, but is that my conscious experiences, starting with my realization that time is a shape of perception, that morality inheres in consciousness, that meaning in language or in anything can only come from consciousness. All of the walking through this whole thing, including, again, I didn't go into what I learned from our home burning, what I learned from like 7 people dying suddenly who were very important to me, what I learned over and over and over, is the only thing that's real or meaningful is conscious awareness. And our job here is to expand our experience of ourself as unfettered, free, conscious beings. All right. There's a lot that could be said, but that's all I got this morning. Love you guys. Have a great day. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.